If you want an example of a distillery who really cracked the code, won over the hearts and minds of whiskey enthusiasts, and then completely squandered the keys to the kingdom, Ardbeg. It wasn't that long ago until you would only hear glowing opinions of everyone drinking Ardbeg whiskey. Everyone loved it. It was really the hype train to be on. But a string of opportunistically priced committee releases seem to have taken a little bit of the shine away. I get the feeling that Ardbeg, to start with, the committee probably was kind of giving back to the diehard fans. They used to say that quite a lot, that it was giving back to those people that supported them and they'd been there all through the years. But it seems like lately they kind of thought that they could make some cash out of the Ardbeg committee, because a lot of them have been really highly priced, and a lot of the recent ones have not been very well received, and it just seems like a little bit of a cash cow. And this is the latest in a long line of cash cows. This is Ardbeg committee release. It's actually the Ardbeg Day Facila release for 2025, I believe. It's Ardbeg Smokiverse, and I think that's an incredible box. A lot of people won't like it because it's a bit out there. Some people might find it a little bit tacky, but I think it's incredible. I think it looks really, really good. Lovely bit of design there. Give you a close up of all the other stuff on there. What is that? Spirit Safe. Basically becoming a YouTube photocopier here. Scanning the boxes for hundreds of bottles in, so you guys at home can look at them without having to go to the shop, basically. A human Xerox at this point. So you may have seen reviews of this on YouTube already, because Ardbeg, as a lot of the more social media aware distilleries do, they decided to send out a bunch of bottles of this out in advance to select YouTubers who, shall we say, Ardbeg wanted them to be able to publicly express their opinions on this, in particular before release date. I don't particularly like that. I know why they do it. I can see what they're trying to do, but I am not an influencer, at least no more than, say, your neighbour or the guy down the street who likes whiskey and likes to talk to you about it. And while I don't blame Ardbeg for doing what they're doing by giving a bunch of free bottles of this to whiskey tubers and influencers, I just don't really like feeling like distilleries are playing the whiskey enthusiast community game. In my humble opinion, if Ardbeg want to get people back on board, then make good whiskey for a fair price. That's how you did it in the first place, and you can do it again if you want to. As for the price of this one, if you buy it from Ardbeg directly, then it's £95. If you buy it from one of the retailers who got it a few days after it went on sale on the Ardbeg Committee website, then it may be a few pounds less. So at £95, considering that a lot of the recent Ardbeg Committee releases have been pants, to put it mildly. Why did I buy this? Well, one, because I really like Ardbeg, although if I'm honest, I'm getting sick of a lot of these committee releases as well. But the big reason why I bought this one is because it's an experimental Ardbeg. It's an Ardbeg that doesn't just put whiskey in a different cask. It's not your dark cove or your drum or things like that. It's whiskey where they're changing part of the whiskey making process to give us geeks a little bit of insight into what it does and how it works. Because this is an experimental Ardbeg committee release for the geeks, we stand a chance of learning something about whiskey making. Would I buy this one for £95 if it was just a bottle of whiskey without that technical geekery? No, I would not. Would I spend £95 on this if it was just a bottle of whiskey without that technical details? I would not. Would I buy this bottle of whiskey based on the specs on the box and what they tell you and the flavours that I've already tasted from this whiskey for £95? No, I would not. But I think because it has that technical aspect where they've changed part of the production. I think that it has something to offer. And for those of us that really believe that the devil is in the details, I think that even at £95, it's still something to consider. At least I did anyway, and I pulled the trigger. I bought one. You may be aware that at £95, this is actually one of the cheaper Ardbeg committee releases from recent years, because some of the committee releases have come out at £150 or even more. And I think that the lower price on this one is probably partially a result of pushback from people like us, because a lot of people have been kicking off that they're really just getting too greedy and the prices are getting too high. And I think it's probably also partially a reaction to the amount of bottles of things like Ardbeg Hardcore that just sat on shelves and probably still are sitting on shelves. So in a way it's good that the price has come down with this one, but it's still high for a whiskey that, as far as we're aware, could be 3 years old. Ardbeg have hinted online that this stuff is around 10 years old, but they won't put an age statement on it despite being single batch, so you could argue that there's no need for them to be cagey about the age statement. It's not like they're going to recreate it again with a second batch, and they might want to put some younger casks in it. This is probably all there is and all there will be. It's one batch. So really, why not put an age statement on it? So in my opinion, the fact that they're not willing to put an age statement on a single batch release, we should probably consider that this may be 3 years old. We shouldn't give them any benefit of the doubt when they say that it's around 10 years old. Talking of price though, because it's going to be a key bone of contention with this one, everyone's going to be thinking about the price or talking about the price. I think that if you're considering this one and you're looking for a good value Ardbeg in terms of the flavours that you get, don't get this one, because you won't get that return for your investment. You won't get value for money out of this one. If you want the best value for money from an Ardbeg, then get the 10-year-old. It has better peat and better flavour than this at less than half the price. So why does this one exist? Why did I buy it? What's the point of it? As I said before, it's kind of an experiment in flavour, an experiment in the whiskey process where we isolate one change in theory in the process and note the differences. Although, honestly, for this to be a real scientific experiment, there really should have been a control batch, or at least an effort to keep everything else with this one the same as, say, the 10-year-old, which as far as I can see, they haven't. So yeah, it's expensive, it's not perfect as an experiment, but it's what we've got, and hopefully there'll be something interesting for us to learn from this one. Let's get it out of the box, as wonderful as it is. Give you a little close-up of the label, which is also rather fantastic looking in my opinion. Details on this one from the label. It is bottled at 48.3%, which I think is a fantastic drinking strength. But as I said before, it's a little bit of a shame that he didn't keep it the same as the 10-year-old. We know that it's non-chill filtered. We know that it's matured in bourbon casks. But as I said before, it's got no age statement and no guarantee of natural colour. So despite costing £95, they're not taking this as seriously as they could. So what's the gimmick? And I don't necessarily mean that in the derogative sense. High gravity. This Ardbeg Smokiverse, if you read the promotional material or the box and the label, it tells you that it's an Ardbeg made with a high gravity mash. So high gravity is a common term in brewing and homebrew, which I'm very familiar with. It's a technique where you start off with an unusually high sugar content in the wort, and it's a very common thing in brewing, and usually when you use a high gravity wort in brewing, you're trying to produce a higher ABV beer, but it doesn't just produce a stronger beer. It's not just to get pissed extra quickly. It can also result in really unique flavours, because as we all know, alcohol and ABV are flavour. If you've had something like special brew, I don't know if other countries have special brew or if that's just something that we have here in the UK. I'm sure it's probably a thing all over the world. If you've had special brew, you'll know what some of those flavours can be. By using a really high OG, you can make stuff which is mind-numbingly strong, and it just doesn't taste very nice. It's literally tramp fuel, it's giggle juice, it exists for getting pished. But a high gravity brew it can be more than that. It can be used to really good effect. You get some high gravity beers out there that are absolutely beautiful, the same as you get high strength whiskies that are absolutely beautiful to drink on their own. And with your high gravity beers, you can, if they're done well and respectfully and with care and love, you can get very pure, very fruity flavours. And taken to the extremes, a high gravity brew in beer, you end up turning beer into barley wine. So we know that this Ardbeg is made with a high gravity mash or a high gravity wort. So how have they done this? The promotional material is a little bit vague on exactly how they've done this, but my guess would be that they've either mashed with a short measure of water, or perhaps they've only used 2 or even just 1 water instead of the usual 3 in the mash tun. Now, doing that would mean that you only get the easily extractable sugars out of the malt, and you'd end up with a very, very concentrated wort. Obviously, one of the big reasons why they don't normally do this is that it's a less grain efficient way of doing things. A big reason why a lot of distilleries normally use 3 waters in the mash tun and waters of increasing temperature is to wring every last little bit of sugar out of your malt. Distilling from a high gravity wort, on the other hand, can be more time efficient, although it comes at the price of wasting malt. Will this high gravity wort produce the same flavours? Absolutely not. It's easy to see that with a high gravity production, you're extracting different things at different times in different ways in the mash tun. If you varied the temperature of the mash, then that will also affect the enzymes that are being extracted. It's also going to affect how your yeast ferments, as the ABV in the washback will affect that fermentation process. In the case of a very strong wort, it can even stop fermentation by stressing the yeasts, as anyone who's tried to ferment undiluted honey or concentrated fruit juice will know. So before we get to the nosing and the tasting, if anyone is wondering, or if anyone has assumed that this stuff is sold out already, actually, I'm recording this on the 8th of June, 2025, and it's actually still in stock. It's been on sale for well over a week, and you can still get it if you sign up to the committee at Ardbeg, which is just a matter of giving them your email address. This is still available, 2 bottles per customer at £95. So if you do want this and you think you've missed out, you can actually still get it. Now, whether Ardbeg are increasing production or people are just losing interest, these are sticking around. For reference, a few years ago, committee releases would generally sell out in about 10 minutes. Interesting. Is that natural colour? Who knows? Who cares? Ardbeg don't care. I can see on my monitor that I've been recording this video for 20 minutes already, and I haven't got around to any nosing or tasting. Who's upset with me? Ardbeg Smokiverse on the nose. Very sugary. Sugary soda drinks. Full sugar soda. Fruit cordial. Chewits. For anyone who's not from the UK, because I'm sure are Chewits even still a thing? Can you still buy Chewits? Chewy fruit sweets is what I mean there. Lime pastels, as well as a very crystalline, sugary, artificial sweetness. A little bit like the sugar you get from like a sugar-free sorbitol chewing gum. A little bit of an estery glue note as well, like a cyanacrylate super glue note. Slightly lactic and creamy on the nose. Little echoes of fermentation, but not quite to that, not anywhere near that level, but definitely fruity and estery. Peat smoke and oak. And from nosing and tasting this before, the longer that you leave it in the glass, that brightness does diminish a little bit, and it starts to become replaced with a little bit of an ashy and burnt quality with time. But overall, I would say that this Ardbeg Smokiverse is definitely fruitier and sweeter and more rounded, as well as less peated than the Ardbeg 10-year-old. I think that the Ardbeg 10-year-old has a more dry and ashy and industrial peat than what you get on this one. I would say that this Ardbeg Smokiverse, it's not a peat forward whiskey, especially not for an Ardbeg, and I think that some hardcore peat heads might even miss the peat on the nose of this one entirely. So some interesting differences picked up on the nose of this already. Let's see how it tastes and see how that continues. Lots of sweet bourbon on the arrival, nice sour smoky oak, and lots of fruity limes, like limes on a salty beach barbecue, charcoal barbecue. Really nice wood smoke, peatiness coming through on the palate of this one. Estery pear drops, but lots of smokiness. In particular, I'd say wood smoke, like charcoal barbecue and wood bonfire. The peat is really starting to come through now. And I think generally that this one has really good body. I think that Ardbeg is one of those distilleries that is, despite the peat and the big heavy hitting flavours, it is a delicate malt. And I think part of that is down to that purifier that we saw removed for the previous Ardbeg committee release Heavy Vapours. But Ardbeg is a deceptively delicate spirit. And I think this one, for whatever reason, it has really good body, increased body compared to a lot of Ardbegs. But on the flip side of that, I think that this Ardbeg Smokiverse is just not as focused, it's not as peaty, and particularly it's not as smoky as the normal Ardbeg 10-year-old. On the palate, I wouldn't say that this Ardbeg Smokiverse is necessarily sweeter than the Ardbeg 10-year-old, as I found on the nose. I think that on the palate, the sweetness that you get in this Ardbeg Smokiverse is just a different sweetness to what you get on the Ardbeg 10. I'd say that we're talking about more of a rounded, easygoing and broad sweetness compared to the slightly narrower, sharper, more focused and refined sweetness that you get on the 10. I think that this Ardbeg Smokiverse, it's more of a fruity sweetness as opposed to a slightly more spirity sweetness. Let's have another sip and look at the finish. Lots of fruity barley sugar on the finish of this one. And you can really tell that that is coming through from that high gravity mash. It's a much more sugary and sweeter, slightly more cloying, and just more estery and fruity experience. Also getting some cough sweets on the finish and some dry, salty wood smoke. Interestingly, getting some slightly rummy notes on this one as well. Towards the late palate and the finish on this one, I'm getting some very fruity rum notes, which I think in a blind could probably be mistaken for like a heavily peated whiskey finished in a Jamaican golden rum cask or something like that. Like one of the super estery, fruity rums like a Hamden or a Long Pond. Definitely some fruity rum notes and a little bit of fruity pina colada on the finish. And I'd actually say that the finish is one of the areas of this Ardbeg Smokiverse which is most different from the 10. I think that, again, we're seeing a more rounded sweetness and more fruitiness, whereas the 10, to my palate, is more burnt and charred, more medicinal, and in particular, much, much more edgy than this. I think, in general, this is doing something mildly similar to what we had with fermentation from Ardbeg, but I think that this one is a little bit milder and a little bit tamer and a little bit more well-behaved. I think that while this and fermentation are both fruitier, I think that this is fruitier in a different way to fermentation. Again, I think that it's accentuated that estery, fruity side of Ardbeg, which in my opinion is always there. But I don't think that this one has done the same in terms of bringing out the depth and heft that we had from that longer maturation on fermentation, which some people will probably say is a good thing, because the fermentation, it did bring out some oddball flavours, which I loved. But I think that this Ardbeg Smokiverse, it's still objectively very good. And more importantly, perhaps, than the quality of this one, because I really don't recommend buying this one just in order to get a really good whiskey. Because I really think that at the price they're selling this for, your money is better spent elsewhere than spending it on this just to get a good bottle of whiskey. You'd be much better off buying any combination of the 4 or 5 Ardbeg core range releases, rather than buying this stuff. But I think as an experiment, it's great to see this new committee release and gain some whiskey making info by looking under the whiskey hood. I think that something really unexpected happened with this one though, and I've mentioned it in passing already, and it's unexpected to me at least, that this one is expectedly fruitier, but it's also, to my tastes, much less peaty than a 10-year-old. And I do wonder if some of that peat, which is tied up in the husks of the malted barley, isn't fully extracted by those first waters, which, if true, raises the question of what would happen if you boiled your mash tun for longer. And this is absolutely the kind of thing that I think makes these experimental Ardbeg committee releases worthwhile. Something like your Ardbeg Drum or your Ardbeg Dark Cove even, which a lot of people liked. I am not tempted to buy those for the price that they sell for, but give me something where you're doing something geeky and involved and doing something that can teach us something. And I'm not saying that I'm going to buy it because they're still expensive, but you've got my attention. For me personally though, this has absolutely been a worthwhile experiment. For someone like me who likes to learn about the effects of various processes in the whiskey making, unless you distill yourself, it's not something that most of us have access to, and gladly, the result of this isn't just a £95 bottle of Ardbeg 10. In my opinion, it's much fruitier, it has a broader and weightier flavour profile compared to the unexpectedly delicate profile of Ardbeg 10. But in doing this high gravity mash, I think that you do definitely lose something, which just goes to show what a complicated thing whiskey is and what a balancing act distilling is. They've made what we should probably acknowledge is a relatively minor change in the production process, and they've made something which is very un-Ardbeg. I have also tried this one with water. I'm not going to do it on camera, but I have tried it, and I think that with water you do get a little bit more of that fruity esteriness coming through. I think that with water the peat retreats into a little bit of a dark coffee note, which I don't know whether I should say it, might upset some people, but it reminds me a little bit of Ardbeg Hardcore, although to be fair, better. But with water, this one, the peat is well and truly greatly diminished from the normal Ardbeg peat, but still making a really lovely contrast to that fruitiness. Something that did really interest me on this one, and I actually only figured this out probably a few hours before I sat down to record this video. There was a few times when I was tasting this, and I kept thinking that the dark peat and bright fruitiness really reminded me of something, and I eventually figured out what it was. And I think it's the English whiskey company Smoky. I think probably a combination of the bright malt and dark peatiness that you get on that, and perhaps leaning a little bit into the fruity, dark peaty notes that you get on like a Lagavulin 8. But that enhanced estery fruitiness coming through on this one really reminds me of some of the super fruity maltiness that you get on a lot of the English Whiskey Company single malt releases, and to a lesser extent a lot of the other craft distilleries like Bimber, Cotswolds, Kingsbarns and Daftmill. And I eventually realised, the penny dropped, and I realised why this high gravity Ardbeg Smokiverse was reminding me of those craft distilleries. And I think that it's because this is an Ardbeg where they've gone for that kind of take your time, low yield, flavour forward production. And the reason why English Whiskey Company and a lot of the new craft distilleries have those similar estery, very barley malt, sugary barley malt forward profiles is that they're operating that same low yield, hands-on, kind of good things come to those who wait production every single day. And I really think that that's massive, massive praise to all of the recently opened craft distilleries that we've got these days. Going back to the Smokyverse though, I do honestly think that this is a very nice peated whiskey. It has great flavours, great body, even when you dilute this stuff to 46% and compare it to the Ardbeg 10. It is very, very pleasant stuff, but I do also think that it loses a lot of what makes Ardbeg unique. I think that the Ardbeg 10-year-old is a damn near perfect peated whiskey, and it's hard to change without losing some of that magic. I think that this one is a success as an experimental Ardbeg though. I feel like I've learnt something from tasting this. As someone who has tried most of what whiskey has to offer, I do find new things hard to find, and I really, really value these little learning experiences. And in that sense, I might consider this value for money for £95. But as a bottle of whiskey, as with most committee releases, it's not. Thank you all for watching, and hats off to you if you've got this far in the video. Honestly, thank you very, very much. And thank you for joining me, as with every video. Let me know what your thoughts on this one are, whether you've had it or not, and share any little eureka, no pun intended, eureka moments that you have had with whiskey production. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Cheers.